Urban legends are commonplace throughout the world, and they're not just limited to urban spaces despite that name. There are clearly suburban and rural legends as well. I can recall some notable urban legends that generated around my rather rural elementary school and middle school. One was focused around this strange rundown cabin behind my elementary school's playground beyond a fence. If you climbed up to the top of the jungle gym, you could see a building overgrown with weeds and trees and very dilapidated. Many stories speculated about this building, but they all mainly just ended up being about how some deranged serial killer lived there, so you shouldn't go near the fence too often, or you shouldn't be around the school late at night or something like that. There were even comparisons to Jason of Friday the 13th fame, and even at times children would state that Jason from the movies actually lived there and the movies were somehow based off this actual person living behind our school. In short, it was my school's own Cropsey legend, which we will come back to later. Something intriguing for us here is the fact that Jason was used to describe this figure in this legend, and that sometimes so much so that kids actually said it was in fact Jason. What are we to make of films that totally impact our urban legends, myths, and stories that we use while growing up? Here's another intriguing example. A popular legend around my schools too was that you could actually do the Candyman ritual. Though it was interchanged with the more traditional Bloody Mary ritual, which the Candyman ritual in the film and story is based off of, the idea that it was Candyman from the 1992 horror film by the same name was popular. A beneficial approach to questioning what this exchange of filmic urban legends and the real life urban legends would be to return to the film of Candyman itself, and perhaps as we explore this, it would be beneficial to question why Candyman is returning to our cinemas soon. Welcome to Analysis with Alex, a YouTube channel that aims to provide you lengthy video essay explorations in the form of units to provide a resource to grow your skills in cultural analysis and in turn self-growth. Think of this as a channel that you can go to get access to the film classes you never got to take in college because either you couldn't go to college or because it didn't fit into your requirements. That's why I'm here. This video is part of a series titled The Terror of Trauma, which explores horror films that deal with the theme of trauma in some capacity. If you haven't already, I would suggest that you go back and watch some of the other videos in this series as they kind of build upon each other and it will make a lot more sense. There's even a playlist on the channel page to help you go through these easily. Also, it typically helps if you've seen the film before I talk about it here, so seek out Candyman however you see fit. Before we get into Candyman, Slenderman, and urban legends even further, if you value this channel as an educational resource and you want to join up on more explorations, please hit the subscribe button so you can know when more videos are released. Candyman is a rather self-aware film when you give it credit where credit is due. I think this film knew it was ahead of its time somewhat. When compared to other popular horror films around the same time, it clearly believes that it is a horror film that can play for higher stakes than many of these slasher or gore films coming out around the late 80s and early 90s. I would make the case that Candyman is highly meta, in the sense that it's meta storytelling. So meta cinema is a term that's used to describe a film or moments in a film that focus on aspects of filmmaking itself. Hence, meta storytelling would be moments in a story that focus on aspects of storytelling. And the component of storytelling that Candyman is highly concerned with is that of urban legends. Candyman sort of even states its central idea within the film as if it's a thesis, ironically. Funny enough, that too seems to be the case we've been making for all these films in our unit, that horror films in some sense can be a coping mechanism or a method to understand trauma that occurs to us individually, but also on a larger cultural scale. This is emphasized in the film through the variety of social groups and regions that the legend of Candyman permeates through. The opening of the film takes place in some suburb somewhere that may not even be near Chicago, where the rest of the film takes place. These people are noticeably white and young, as opposed to other characters throughout the film who are either older or black. The suburbs indicate a socioeconomic class around the middle class, as opposed to the rest of the film, which tends to explore both the academic, rich elite of Chicago and the lower class poverty, notably black citizens of the Cabrini Green projects. What I feel this film really gets at is the fluid nature in which stories, especially creepy and horrific ones, revolving around trauma in some capacity, can obtain and thrive in. These stories impact and influence every character in the film in some manner, whether that's for better or for worse. This isn't such a far cry to compare the ability of an urban legend to the rampant success of something like the true crime media, because it functions in a pretty similar manner. This fluid nature of urban legends was a concern of mine in the last semester of my undergraduate degree, in which I presented the argument that urban legends go through migrational patterns of sorts, weaving in and out of each other, which isn't a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. However, I did present a rising concern about what that means for urban legends conjured during the digital era, ones that are made online and tend to stay there, especially with the prevalence of Slenderman. Slenderman was a pretty popular internet sensation for me throughout my younger years. If you do not know who/what Slenderman is a character created through various online creepypastas. Creepypastas are copypasta stories but centered around horror. So, someone makes a creepy story, someone else likes that, they then just copy that, they go and kind of edit it and make their own version of it. Hence, copypasta, creepypasta. The character and its lore really took off with the viral sensations of a found footage fan series online called Marble Hornets, and the video games Slender the 8 Pages and its sequel, Slender the Arrival. Slenderman arguably saw the same treatment of urban legends before that of the internet, but was exponentially more transformative, engaging, interactive, and intense over time, and much faster than others had been in the past. In fact, you can actually access parts of a book I used in my senior thesis, Folklore, Horror Stories, and the Slenderman, the Development of an Internet Mythology, over on Google Scholar. I will link it in the description below for anyone interested in diving into that. The book presents more detail on what I just basically synthesized for you. All of this conversation around Slenderman as an interesting cultural phenomenon almost always leads to the infamous stabbing conducted by two 12-year-old girls in 2014 on one of their friends, which they claim Slenderman was an influence on their actions. This incident is explored in detail in the 2016 HBO documentary Beware the Slenderman. The documentary makes some brief asides to exploring Slenderman as a cultural phenomenon, and when it does, you can see clear parallels to our comments earlier about Candyman. Slenderman comes to resemble the collective trauma of the internet generation, especially that of the stranger danger mentality many of us grew up with. He is faceless and entangles you, much like the internet itself. These sentiments are outlined in that documentary, which I highly encourage you give a watch however you see fit that you can see it. Candyman resembles the collective trauma and oppression of those in Cabrini Green and abroad. Slenderman resembles the collective trauma and fears of those brought up by the internet. So what do we make of this strange relationship when we witness these stories impacting our reality? Whether it be the Bloody Mary ritual turning into the Candyman ritual, or some of the more devastating outcomes like we see with Slenderman, with these stories impacting people in powerful and dangerous ways. Another documentary that I think makes an excellent secondary viewing is the 2009 documentary Cropsey. This documentary examines and reflects on the director's, Joshua Zeman's, childhood legend of Cropsey around Staten Island. As mentioned earlier in this video, the documentary mentions how many regions throughout the eastern United States have some variant of this legend. Deformed guy lives in a weird part of the region and comes out at night and might harm kids, much like the cabin at my elementary school. Zeman focuses specifically on the abduction of children during his time growing up in Staten Island, as it provided some kind of legitimacy to this legend. As Zeman and his team worked to explore the story of 5 missing children, often associated with that legend, they discovered that it's rather difficult to compress the slipperiness in which an urban legend can present itself into a single narrative, as the documentary spins off into various different territories. Ultimately, much like what is presented in Candyman, the documentary presents the legend as a method of catharsis of the community impacted by such traumatic events. catharsis being something we discussed in our last video. Cropsey presents one way to understand the migration and timelessness of urban legends like that of the Cropsey legend, and Zeman attempts this again as well in another documentary titled Killer Legends in 2014. So keeping in mind how these stories and legends seem to tap into the catharsis for various communities, perhaps start paying attention to when you see a story, whether from a movie or the internet, begin to migrate and transform around your culture. It perhaps shows some kind of trauma or memory that your culture must push onto a boogeyman that is only discussed in the shadows, that is only discussed to the side. Yet, from time to time, it shows up again to be talked about. It perhaps indicates that trauma is still left unchecked, and perhaps that legend and that boogeyman must return to stir up that conversation once again. Thank you so much for continuing this exploration of horror cinema and themes involving trauma. Please let me know what you thought of this video in the comments, and please, if you are interested in using this channel as an educational resource, then go ahead and subscribe to it so you can continue to experience a more rich exploration of this genre and its relatively popular theme of trauma. I'm currently in the middle of trying to find a job and moving, as I've said before, so videos might be still a bit sporadic for a period of time, but they will continue to be published. Once again, thank you for your time, and I will see you all during our next exploration.